4,500 years ago, the land we now call Mesopotamia was a patchwork of proud, independent city-states. Each one had its own king, its own gods, its own walls, and its own endless rivalries. Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, with its magnificent ziggurats, Lagash, Kish, all of them fighting over water, over land, over glory. The Sumerians had invented writing, the wheel, irrigation canals that turned desert into farmland. They built temples that touched the sky and created some of the most beautiful art the world had ever seen. But they could never stay united. One king would conquer another, only to be overthrown a generation later. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates gave life, but they also brought floods, drought, and endless war. No one imagined that a single man from a small northern city could change all of that forever. No one dreamed that the world's very first empire was about to be born. Yet deep in the north, in a city called Kish, a man named Sargon was waiting in the shadows. He wasn't born a prince. He wasn't even born a soldier. According to the ancient legends that still survive on clay tablets, Sargon was found as a baby floating in a basket on the river, a story that would later echo in other great leaders' tales. He rose to become a humble cupbearer to the king of Kish, but fate had bigger plans. One day, the king of Kish had a terrifying dream. The gods warned him that this young cupbearer would one day take his throne. The king tried to kill Sargon. Instead, Sargon escaped, gathered supporters, and did the unthinkable. He overthrew his master. And then, he set his eyes on the south, on the rich, powerful, divided Sumerian cities that had never bowed to a single ruler. This is the story of how one man forged the world's first true empire, how his descendants took it to godlike heights, and how in the end, the very forces that built it, ambition, conquest, and the unforgiving climate, tore it all apart. Stay with me, because once Sargon began his march, nothing in the ancient world would ever be the same again. By around 2334 BC, Sargon had seized control of Kish, but he wasn't satisfied with one city. He looked south to the great Sumerian king Lugal-Zagassi, who had already united much of the south under his own rule. Sargon challenged him directly. In battle after battle, Sargon's forces smashed through Sumerian armies. He captured Lugal-Zagassi alive, put a yoke around his neck like a common prisoner, and paraded him through the streets of Nippur. It was a message to every city: the old order was dead. Sargon didn't stop there. He marched east into Elam, west toward the Mediterranean, north into the mountains. Ancient records claim he fought and won 34 battles in a single year. He created something completely new, a professional standing army. Not farmers who went home after harvest, but full-time soldiers loyal only to him. And then he did something even bolder. He founded a brand new capital city on the banks of the Euphrates. He called it Akkad, or Agad. No one knows exactly where it stood. It remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. But from this city, Sargon ruled an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Anatolia. For the first time in history, one man controlled dozens of different peoples, languages, and cultures under a single crown. He placed his own trusted governors in every major city. He standardized weights and measures. He made Akkadian, his own Semitic language, the language of administration across the entire realm. Sargon ruled for over 50 years. When he died of natural causes around 2279 BC, he left behind the blueprint for every empire that would follow. But the real test was yet to come. Could his sons and grandsons hold this fragile new creation together? Sargon's immediate successors faced the hardest job of all, making the empire last. His son Rimush had to crush constant rebellions from Sumerian cities that still dreamed of independence. He succeeded, but at a terrible cost in blood. Then came Manishtushu, who expanded trade routes and brought wealth flowing into Akkad like never before. But it was Sargon's grandson Naram-Sin who would take the empire to its absolute peak. Under Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire became something the world had never seen. He pushed the borders even farther, into Syria, into the Zagros Mountains, perhaps even reaching the cedar forests of Lebanon. He called himself King of the Four Quarters, meaning he ruled the entire known world. And then he did something shocking. He declared himself a living god. On his famous victory stele, now in the Louvre, Naram-Sin stands taller than everyone else, wearing the horned crown of divinity, trampling his enemies underfoot, while the gods looked down in approval. The empire was no longer just political. It was divine. Akkad became a cosmopolitan center. Merchants from across the known world brought lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus. The Akkadians developed new art styles, new cylinder seals that told stories in miniature, new ways of recording history on clay. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like the empire would last forever. But even at its height, cracks were forming. Rebellions in the south, pressure from mountain tribes in the east, and something far more dangerous that no king could control: the changing climate itself. Naram-Sin's reign was the high watermark of Akkadian power, but greatness often carries the seeds of its own destruction. Ancient Sumerian scribes later wrote a poem called The Curse of Akkad. In it, they claimed Naram-Sin committed the ultimate sin. He attacked the holy city of Nippur and destroyed the temple of the great god Enlil. Whether the story is literal or symbolic, rebellions did explode across the empire during his later years. City after city rose up against Akkadian rule. Naram-Sin crushed them all with ruthless efficiency, but the cost was enormous. By the time he died around 2218 BC, the empire was still standing, but it was exhausted. His successor Shar-Kali-Shari tried desperately to hold everything together. He fought wars on multiple fronts, against Elamites, against Amorites, against Gutian raiders from the Zagros Mountains. He kept the empire alive for a few more decades, but the Golden Age was over. The rivers began to run lower, the rains became unreliable, crops started to fail, and the people began to whisper that the gods had turned their backs on Akkad. Around 2200 BC, something catastrophic happened to the climate of the entire Near East. Scientists today call it the 4.2 kilo-year event, a massive, centuries-long mega-drought. In Mesopotamia, the once fertile plains turned to dust. Canals dried up. Fields that had fed millions now produced almost nothing. Famine spread like wildfire. Cities that had been loyal to Akkad for generations now faced starvation. Rebellions erupted not out of ambition, but out of desperation. The empire's vast size, once its greatest strength, became its fatal weakness. It was simply too big to feed when the rains disappeared. Internal records grow silent. Trade collapsed. The grand palaces of Akkad began to empty. And then came the final blow. From the eastern mountains, a people the Sumerians called the Gutians swept in. The ancient texts describe them as scorpions in human form, fierce, barbaric nomads who showed no mercy. They didn't conquer in great battles. They simply poured into the weakened lands, looting, burning, and destroying whatever remained. By around 2154 BC, the once mighty Akkadian Empire had crumbled into dust. The city of Akkad itself was abandoned and eventually lost to history. The world's first empire had lasted less than 200 years. The collapse was total. For the next century or more, Mesopotamia fell back into chaos, a dark age of small warring states and Gutian rulers who left almost no records. But the dream Sargon had started did not die. Later empires, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, all studied the Akkadian model. They copied the idea of a centralized government, a professional army, a common language for administration, and the concept of one ruler over many peoples. Even the Bible remembers the region as the land of Akkad. The Akkadians gave the world something no one had ever achieved before, the proof that humans could build something larger than a single city or tribe. They showed that one man's vision could reshape an entire region, and they also left us a warning. No empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to the forces of nature, internal division, or the anger of its own people. The world's first empire rose like a blazing star and fell back to earth in a single generation. But its light still shines across 4,500 years of history. Every empire that came after it, from Rome to the ones we see today, walks in the footsteps Sargon first carved into the dust of Mesopotamia. That is the true story of the Akkadian Empire, the world's first, and perhaps its most important.